Ren Kisaragi had given the foreign auditor access to the safest corner of his empire because he believed nothing important could be damaged there. 48 hours later, 43 Kisaragi vessels were sitting outside Japanese ports with cargo they were no longer authorized to unload. Ren expected panic when he summoned her. Instead, Amara Vale placed 3 inspection records on his desk and showed him that somebody had authenticated cargo from places they had never physically visited. 3 days earlier, Amara had entered Kisaragi Maritime Holdings carrying a leather portfolio, a temporary access badge, and a name that was almost hers. Amara Vance. That was what the reception desk knew her as. London-based corporate risk specialist, external compliance advisor, temporary inconvenience. The headquarters occupied 31 floors of dark glass and looked out over Tokyo Bay. It was legitimate enough to appear in pension fund portfolios and old enough to have survived scandals that would have destroyed younger companies. The men waiting for her on the 26th floor did not look concerned about any of that. Shun Kisaragi sat at the far end of the conference table. Silver had begun at his temples, and one hand rested beside a printed insurance notice. "Our European partners require additional review," he said. "We intend to cooperate completely." He sounded exhausted by the idea of cooperating. Amara took the empty chair without opening her portfolio. Ren Kisaragi stood near the windows rather than sitting. She had studied surveillance photographs of him for 6 months. They had not prepared her for how little he asserted authority in person. No dramatic entrance, no entourage crowding the room, no jewelry except a watch and a dark signet ring on his right hand. The file described him as chairman of Kisaragi Maritime Holdings. The sealed file described him differently. Acting head of Kisaragi Kai. Shipping, construction, private security, nightlife holdings. Debt networks, political intermediaries. Not convicted of anything substantial enough to strip him of either title. Amara had been assigned to change that. Ren finally turned from the window. "What exactly do the insurers want?" "Confidence," Amara said. Shun gave a faint smile. "That sounds expensive. It usually is." Ren looked at her for a second longer than professional courtesy required. He then picked up the insurance notice. "What do you need?" "Unrestricted review access to the divisions named in the consortium agreement. Unrestricted within those divisions." Shun leaned back. Ren did not. He scanned the page. Then he looked toward one of his executives. "Give her secondary port insurance compliance." Amara heard what he meant. Not freight scheduling, not procurement, not international banking, not anything that could expose the center of the company. A side corridor, a controlled room, a place to keep the foreign consultant occupied until the insurers calmed down. Ren passed the paper back to her. "Find whatever makes the investors feel useful." There was no insult in his voice. That made the dismissal clearer. Amara stood. "I'll need archive access too." Shun answered before Ren could. "Of course. That was the first mistake." By noon, Amara had access to 5 years of claims records inspection, histories, cargo risk approvals, and insurer correspondence. She worked from a glass office that had been prepared for her beside the compliance department. Employees came in politely, answered narrowly, and left quickly. Nobody challenged her. Nobody volunteered anything either. That suited her. People lied in explanations. Systems were less imaginative. At 6:17 p.m., she found the first irregularity. 3 cargo risk approvals had been backdated. Not unusual by itself. Large companies corrected administrative errors constantly. What caught her eye was the approval sequence. The documents covered 3 vessels arriving through 3 different ports. Each required separate physical inspection before insurance clearance. The inspectors listed were different. The locations were different. The validation numbers were not. Amara enlarged the metadata. 11:42:08, 11:42:14, 11:42:19, 11 seconds. 3 inspections supposedly completed hundreds of kilometers apart. She checked the system procedure. A validation number could only be generated after the inspector entered a local terminal credential and confirmed a physical inspection. Even a perfectly coordinated fraud should have taken longer. Someone had not simply forged signatures. Someone had produced the approvals centrally. At 7:03, Shun entered her office, carrying 2 additional folders. "You work late, so do your ports." He placed the files down. "Administrative corrections. They should be included in tomorrow's report." Amara opened the first. Another backdated approval. This one required her electronic authorization. She looked at the signature field. Why me? The insurer wanted independent review, and these shipments already moved. A procedural issue. If I authorize them now, I certify that the original risk assessment was valid. Shun watched her. Yes, there it was. Not clumsy corruption. Better than that. If regulators examined the transaction, Amara's name would sit between the questionable shipment and the insurer. An outsider? Temporary. Disposable. Shun had not underestimated her intelligence because he was careless. He had calculated that her lack of local power mattered more. Amara closed the file. "I'll review them. I assumed you would." He left. Amara waited until the elevator indicator showed that he had reached another floor. Then she opened the consortium contract. There were 418 pages. The clause she needed was on page 337. Emergency suspension of insured unloading rights in the presence of potentially compromised inspection authentication. She read it twice. Then she used it. At 8:11 the next morning, the first port rejected a Kisaragi unloading request. By 8:26, 4 more did the same. At 9:10, Kisaragi Maritime's Operations Division was calling insurers in London, Rotterdam, and Singapore. By 10, Sugralard 43 vessels had been temporarily restricted. Containers remained aboard. Storage penalties started accumulating. Customers demanded explanations. Nobody had been arrested. Nothing had been seized. The ships simply could not complete the final legitimate step that turned cargo into revenue. Amara was reviewing a 4th validation sequence when her office phone rang. "Mr. Kisaragi wants you upstairs." She arrived 4 minutes later. Ren was alone this time. 3 printed records lay on his desk. He pointed at them. "You did this. I applied a contractual safeguard. You froze 43 ships. No, the insurers did, on your request, on evidence." He looked down at the documents. "How much time to clear the vessels?" "Yes, if the inspection records are legitimate hours, and if they aren't?" "Depends how many more I find." That answer made him finally sit. He turned the first record toward her. "These inspections were approved internally. That's the problem." She placed her tablet beside the paper and showed him the timestamps. 3 numbers, 3 ports, 11 seconds. Ren studied them. Amara expected denial, or an order to have the files corrected. Instead, he pressed the internal phone. "Send compliance everything she asks for. No deletions. No revised files unless the original is preserved." Amara watched him. That was not what Superintendent Siraj's profile had predicted. Ren ended the call. "You expected me to destroy something. I expected resistance. You have 43 ships. You gave me access." That almost produced a smile. Almost. Then Ren glanced at her temporary badge. "You were supposed to be an auditor." "I am." "No auditor I know stops ships before breakfast. No chairman I know gives one access to a system he hasn't verified." His eyes returned to the timestamps. For the first time since she entered the building, the imbalance between them had changed. Not disappeared. Changed. Ren controlled the company. He controlled men Amara had only seen in surveillance photographs. He possessed relationships that did not appear on any corporate chart. Inside the narrow contractual territory he had handed her as harmless, he could not override what she had done. Any attempt would expose him to greater scrutiny. He had misjudged the room he placed her in. So had Shun. Ren pushed the records back. "Find out who created them." "I intend to." That afternoon, Amara traced the authentication chain deeper. The first 2 validations ended in masked server nodes. The third did not. Someone had made a small configuration error 18 months earlier. They had left an archived routing certificate attached to the validation environment. Amara followed it through 2 deprecated systems until a familiar institution appeared on her screen. She stopped typing. Not Kisaragi Maritime, not a subcontractor, not a private inspection company. The certificate originated inside a protected authentication environment. That environment was connected to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police evidence infrastructure. Amara checked it twice, then once more from a separate audit terminal. Same result. A police-linked system had been involved in validating suspect cargo. At 6:32 p.m., she left the headquarters and crossed 2 blocks to a taxi. She waited until traffic carried her away from the building. Only then did she contact Superintendent Daigo Sera through the secure channel. He answered on the second signal. What did you find? A validation certificate tied to police evidence infrastructure. There was a short pause. Not surprise. Calculation. Amara noticed the difference because she had spent years listening to people decide how much truth to give her. Send me the summary, Sarah said. I want authorization to trace the source system. No? She looked out at the passing lights. Why? Because that is not your target. A police system is authenticating Kisaragi cargo, or someone copied an old certificate. Stay inside your assignment. I can verify that. You can compromise 6 months of work chasing technical noise. Amara said nothing. Sarah continued. Stay on Ren Kisaragi. Do not investigate the police connection. The call ended. Amara remained in the taxi with the secure phone resting against her palm. Then, she opened the validation record again. One detail had bothered her since the afternoon. The certificate timestamp. She compared it to the corresponding shipment authorization. The police-linked validation had been generated 6 hours earlier. Before the cargo record, it supposedly verified had formally existed. She had entered Kisaragi Maritime, believing she was looking for evidence Ren Kisaragi had hidden. Now she had found evidence that seemed to exist before his people created the crime around it. And the first person who told her not to look closer was the man who had sent her inside. By the next morning, Amara had stopped thinking of the police-linked certificate as a technical irregularity. She still had no proof of corruption. What she had was a contradiction, and contradictions were often more useful. The validation had existed 6 hours before the cargo record it supposedly verified. Sarah had told her not to pursue it. Ren had given her access to the records instead of trying to close the door. None of those facts meant what she wanted them to mean yet. So she went back to the numbers. Kisaragi Maritime's 5-year route history showed a pattern she had missed during the first review. Several of the company's most profitable logistics channels had not collapsed under enforcement pressure. They had been deliberately weakened from inside. Warehouse leases canceled before renewal. Freight intermediaries cut off despite record margins. 2 construction-linked shipping contracts abandoned after months of preparation. 3 private security subsidiaries dissolved and rebuilt with different personnel. Then, Amara found the authorizations. Ren Kisaragi had approved every one of the cuts. She spent most of the afternoon tracing losses that no rational chairman should have chosen voluntarily. By 6, she had enough. She confronted him. Ren was reviewing port recovery schedules. She entered his office. You've been dismantling your own revenue. He looked up from the screen. That sounds dramatic. It's accurate. She placed a summary on his desk. 5 divisions, declining margins, contract terminations, voluntary withdrawals from routes that had produced some of the highest cash returns in the group. These weren't regulatory losses. No. Police pressure. No. Then why Ren read the first page as though she had handed him someone else's problem. You audited shipping risk. I audited where the risk came from, and you keep paying to make yourself less profitable. That bothers you. It makes no sense. It makes sense if profit isn't the only cost. Amara waited. He gave her nothing more. She tapped one of the entries. This intermediary, Doubled margins in 18 months. He also made people more expensive. What things Ren closed the file? People. It was not an answer she could put in a report. It was enough to alter the question. Until then, Amara had assumed every disappearing Kisaragi channel had been caused by external pressure or internal incompetence. Now she knew at least some of the damage had been intentional. That did not make Ren less criminal. It made him harder to classify. "You're cutting parts of the organization loose," she said. "I'm cutting parts of a company loose." "You know, that isn't what I mean." Ren's attention stayed on her. "No, it isn't." That was the first time he acknowledged that, however indirectly. Both of them were talking about more than a shipping corporation. Amara left with one question answered and 3 others opened. Why would the head of a criminal organization deliberately strip away profitable operations? Why keep the title if he wanted less of what came with it, and who benefited from the routes he abandoned? The next answer arrived because Ren decided to test her. 2 nights later, the executive floors locked down after an internal security alert. Employees were directed toward elevators. Security teams swept offices in sequence. Amara was halfway to the compliance floor when she noticed one door had been left open. Not wide. Just enough. Restricted archive. Ren's private classification code on the access panel. Too obvious to be accidental? She stopped, then entered anyway. If it was a trap refusing, it would tell him almost as much as taking it. The room was smaller than she expected. Paper records, encrypted storage drives, internal restructuring files. She moved quickly. What she found was not the criminal ledger she had imagined. It was worse for the version of Ren she had been sent to investigate. Termination orders, business closures, internal disciplinary memoranda, contract cancellations, targeting operations connected to coercive debt, opaque subcontractors and intermediaries already flagged in external enforcement reports. 5 years of deliberate contraction. But one period was missing. Exactly 11 months. The same 11 months covered by her current investigation. Amara checked the shelf labels again. Empty. Behind her, the door closed. Ren stood inside the room. He did not call security. He did not ask what she was doing there. He looked at the empty section. "Who told you that file existed?" Amara turned. "No one." That answer would be easier to believe if you hadn't found the room. "You left the door open, and you came in. So, we're both observant." Ren stepped past her and checked the empty shelf himself. "You weren't supposed to know what was missing." "I didn't, until now." He watched her long enough. He decided she might be telling the truth. That was more valuable than belief. "You have training that isn't in your resume," he said. "Most resumes are selective. You recognize surveillance layouts. Corporate risk does involve surveillance. You avoided 2 cameras on the 23rd floor yesterday." Amara did not answer. Ren accepted the silence. Then he pointed at the missing files. "Someone removed those before you arrived." That surprised her. "You're saying it wasn't you?" "I'm saying I wanted to know who would come looking. And now I know you're looking for the same hole. Not trust, but no longer pretense either." The security lockdown ended 10 minutes later. He didn't betray her. That choice cost him nothing visible yet. It changed the balance between them. He knew she was not what she claimed. She knew he knew. Neither moved to destroy the arrangement. The next week gave them reasons to keep it. A construction acquisition came before Ren's board, one expected to expand Kisaragi control over 3 waterfront properties. The numbers were excellent. Amara saw why the deal died. One subcontractor had been forcing distressed owners to sell through private debt pressure. Ren canceled the acquisition after reading the internal report. Shun objected openly. Months of political work disappeared in a single decision. 2 board members resigned from the project. A local development partner withdrew. Ren accepted the loss. Amara said nothing to him about it, but later that same day, she found a low-level Kisaragi accountant moving money through one of the suspicious intermediary firms. It was enough for an arrest, enough for Sarah to call it progress. Amara traced the transfers one layer further. The accountant had not designed anything. He was being used. She withheld the arrest request. She kept following the money. 2 days later, Ren knew. She did not ask how. He did not ask why. That was the first real point of recognition between them. Each had watched the other reject an easy victory. It would have produced the wrong answer. Sarah called that evening. "You're holding evidence. I'm verifying it. You have enough for the accountant. Not enough for the structure. We don't need the structure to start." Amara looked at the previous reports Sarah had sent her. The timing bothered her now. Each major intelligence package had arrived just before Ren cut ties with the same route or intermediary. Too precise, almost predictive. "I want the original source files on the port intelligence," she said. "You have the summaries. I want the metadata." No. Why chain of custody? It was the second time he had narrowed her access when the police records became more interesting than Kisaragi's. Amara wrote down the refusal. The following morning, Ren called her into a private conference room and gave her a financial anomaly involving a shell distributor. No explanation, no request, just a file. She reconstructed it in under an hour. The transaction had been reported to police 7 months earlier. Nothing had happened. Ren was waiting when she returned. "You knew. I suspected." "You reported this, yes. And they ignored it." "Yes. Why show me now?" Ren folded the document once. He set it aside. "Because you keep asking the wrong question, which is whether the police are watching me." He looked toward the closed glass door. "I stopped asking that years ago." Amara understood the implication before he finished. Ren was not afraid that law enforcement had infiltrated his organization. He feared elements in law enforcement were already choosing which parts of his organization could survive. And by then, Amara was too close to both sides to pretend she was only auditing cargo. Shun Kisaragi stopped treating Amara as temporary the week Ren began changing decisions after speaking to her. He did not confront her. That would have given her importance. Instead, he began measuring what Ren was willing to lose. The first sign came during a closed meeting of senior Kisaragi executives. 3 division heads who normally deferred to Ren challenged one of his restructuring orders. They questioned why profitable routes had been cut, why outside compliance had been allowed to interfere with internal business, and why a foreign consultant still had access to documents that should never have left executive control. Amara was not in the room. She heard about it because Ren canceled 2 appointments afterward and spent the afternoon meeting men whose names did not appear anywhere on Kisaragi Maritime's public structure. That evening, he came to her office carrying a folder. "You're done with the private archive." Amara looked up. "Because I found something. Because Shun has started asking why you're still here. So send me home." "No, then don't restrict me. I'm reducing what he can point to. That sounds a lot like control. It sounds like keeping your cover intact. My cover is my responsibility." Ren put the folder down between them. "And my organization is mine." That is exactly the problem. For several seconds, neither moved. Their disagreement was not about access. It was about where protection ended and ownership began. Amara closed the file she had been reading. "If you decide what risks I'm allowed to take, I'm not your partner in this. I never said you were." "No, you just started acting like it." Ren took the folder back. "Then consider this information not permission. Shun is preparing a succession challenge." That changed the argument. Amara knew enough about the Kisaragi structure to understand what it meant. Ren's power was not simply corporate. His authority inside the syndicate depended on senior figures believing he still protected their collective interests. If those same men believed he was dismantling profitable operations under the influence of an outsider, he could lose more than a board vote. "Why now?" she asked. "Because you made the shipping freeze visible. Shun caused that. Yes, but I let you stay after it." The consequence settled between them. Ren had protected her access. Now that choice was being used as evidence against him. "What does he need to win?" Amara asked. "To make me look compromised. You could solve that easily." Ren understood immediately. expose her. Even without proof of her real identity, he had enough. Her surveillance awareness, her presence in the restricted archive, her interest in police metadata. If Ren publicly declared her an infiltrator, suspicion inside Kisaragi would turn away from him. Amara said, "Tell them what you think I am." "No, you could restore your position, temporarily. That isn't the reason." Ren looked toward the window, then back to her. "No." It was the closest either had come to admitting that the calculation was no longer purely strategic. Amara disliked how much that mattered. "Don't protect me by destroying yourself." "I'm not. You're losing support. I was losing it before you arrived. That doesn't make this free." "No," Ren said. "It doesn't." The succession challenge came 3 days later. Not publicly, not theatrically. A formal internal petition circulated through the Kisaragi Senior Council demanding a review of Ren's leadership and the company restructuring linked to it. 2 captains who had backed him for years signed. A third withheld support. Shun had found the correct pressure point. He did not need to prove Ren was weak. He only needed to make powerful men wonder whether Ren's priorities had changed. Ren answered by refusing to expose Amara. The immediate threat to her cover remained contained. 3 Kisaragi-controlled security contracts shifted toward Shun's allies. 1 senior manager resigned. A financing agreement stalled after an internal guarantor withdrew. Ren's authority did not collapse. It began leaking. Amara watched the consequences accumulate in documents. Numbers again. Only now the numbers were attached to a choice, made partly for her. The pressure from Sarah arrived at the same time. He summoned Amara to a secure government office outside her usual reporting location. No assistant, no paper trail on the meeting schedule. A black case sat between them on the table. Sarah opened it. Inside was a cloned access module. Place this inside Kisaragi's private network. Amara did not touch it. What does it collect encrypted traffic? Only collect Sarah's expression stayed neutral. It gives us access. That wasn't my question. He closed the case halfway. We need movement. You have movement. We have an auditor delaying arrests. I have an accountant being used as a buffer and a police-linked validation certificate you told me not to investigate. You were assigned to Ren Kisaragi, and this device authorized. By whom? Sarah leaned back. You're becoming procedural at an inconvenient time. I've always been procedural. No, you've always known when procedure was serving the objective. Amara looked at the module again. If inserted, it would not simply observe Ren's system. Depending on its configuration, it could alter authentication paths and create access artifacts. It could even contaminate the evidence chain. She had spent her career avoiding exactly that. I want the authorization record. You don't need it. Then I'm not placing it. For the first time, Sarah stopped treating the disagreement as technical. You were selected for this operation because you finish what other officers become emotionally confused about. The wording landed badly, not because it was insulting, because it sounded prepared. As if the possibility of emotional conflict had been anticipated before she ever entered Kisaragi Maritime. Amara left without the device. She did not officially refuse the order, but that night she copied her communications with Sarah into an encrypted archive outside the reporting system he controlled. It was the first time in her career she preserved evidence against her own chain of command. The institution that had given her authority was becoming something she might need protection from. Ren found her still at work after midnight. He placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. You look dissatisfied with government service. You look dissatisfied with succession politics. Mine pays better. That might be changing. He sat across from her. No office ceremony now. No pretense that they were merely chairman and auditor. Amara looked at the restructuring files. Why didn't you just leave Kisaragi? Yes. Ren took time before answering. My father thought legitimate businesses would civilize the old organization, and they gave it better hiding places. He explained only what mattered. Every new company had created another legal shield for older criminal relationships. Every attempt to cut one of those relationships had pushed senior figures toward men like Shun. If I dismantled everything at once, Ren said the people underneath it wouldn't disappear. They'd scatter, smaller groups, less control, more pressure on everyone they depend on. So you stayed to contain it. I stayed because leaving would have been cleaner for me and worse for everyone else. Amara did not mistake that for absolution. You still benefited from it. Yes. You still used it. Yes. That honesty did more to earn her trust than denial would have. It also made the attraction between them more dangerous because neither could hide behind innocence. The definitive evidence arrived 2 days later. Sarah sent it directly. A digital authorization tied to Ren's personal encryption key. A major illicit shipment, enough on its face to justify immediate action. Sarah called within minutes. We move tonight. Amara opened the metadata. The authorization was valid. The signature chain matched. The encryption key matched Ren. Then she checked the physical access record. Ren's authentication device had been returned to Tokyo from Osaka 4 hours after the authorization was created. She checked again. Same result. The evidence looked perfect. The timeline was impossible. That evening, Amara went to Ren's private office and placed the file in front of him. By doing so, she crossed a line she could not uncross. This is supposed to end you. Ren read it. You believe it. I believe the signature. That wasn't my question. I don't believe the time. He looked at the authorization date, then opened a drawer and removed a handwritten list of 5 old case numbers. Compare these with which factions were targeted, which routes changed control afterward. Amara took the list. You've been tracking this for years. Why didn't you tell me? Because until tonight, you still worked for the people I suspected. She went back to her apartment and pulled every case she could access. The pattern took less than 2 hours to emerge. One faction raided, another route redistributed, another investigation, another surviving intermediary. Again. And eventually, the same names appeared around businesses linked to Shun. Police action was not merely removing criminals. It was selecting which criminal networks remained useful. Amara stared at the screen until one conclusion became unavoidable. Something she and Ren had both chosen to protect was now inside the conflict itself. He had protected her identity and weakened his authority. She had protected the integrity of the investigation and stepped outside her chain of command. Now, the evidence meant to destroy him had also made her part of whatever system had built it. By morning, Amara had 5 case files open across 3 encrypted screens, and one conclusion she could no longer explain away. The pattern was not random. Each police operation had removed one faction from a route that later became easier for another Kisaragi-linked intermediary to control. Each time, Sarah's office had been close enough to the investigation to influence the evidence chain. Each time, Shun's commercial network had benefited without appearing directly involved. Amara compared the dates again. Then she returned to the first validation certificate she had found in Kisaragi Maritime, 6 hours early. At the time, she had treated it as a technical anomaly. Now it looked like advanced preparation. She pulled Sarah's old intelligence summaries from her private archive. The same problem appeared there, too. Some reports did not merely predict criminal activity well, they predicted it too well. Ren arrived before sunrise. He had not slept much. The succession vote had been moved forward, and 3 senior Kisaragi men had already shifted support toward Shun. Amara turned one of the screens toward him. Your question was literal. Ren looked at the timeline. What question? When you asked whether my investigations always discovered crimes before your people committed them? He read the dates. I told you I stopped asking whether the police were watching me. You thought someone was shaping the investigations. I thought someone was shaping the outcomes. Amara opened another file. This is worse. She showed him a seizure record from 4 years earlier. A rival logistics group had been dismantled after police recovered evidence from a private warehouse. The evidence had been entered into the system 18 hours before the warrant team officially reached the property. Ren studied it without reacting. You knew about this, not that detail. But you knew something, enough to start cutting routes. That answered another question. His 5-year campaign had not been mere reform. It had also been defensive. Ren had been trying to reduce the parts of Kisaragi that could be manipulated. He aimed to blunt Shun's outside leverage. Amara looked at him. You were starving the system. I was trying to, and every time you closed something profitable, you weakened yourself internally. Yes, why not expose Shun because suspicion isn't proof? That was the trap. Ren had been living inside it for years. To destroy Shun, he would have to open the same books. Those books also protected his crimes. Amara returned to the screens. Then, something else became clear. Sarah's insistence on summaries. His refusal to release original source files. The cloned access module. The instruction to stay away from police-linked authentication. All of it fit one structure. Sarah had not been trying to build a case from Amara's evidence. He had been trying to control what kind of evidence she was allowed to see. Ren watched her face. What Amara opened the personnel record for her own assignment. My selection. What about it? Sarah told me I was chosen because I was difficult to compromise. That sounds flattering. It isn't. She scrolled through the approval chain. Her name appeared in recommendations from 3 separate agencies. International credibility. Clean disciplinary record. Successful cross-border prosecutions. Evidence handling praised in court review. Not discretion. Credibility. The realization arrived without drama. Sarah had not chosen an honest investigator, despite planning a dishonest operation. He had chosen her because of it. If a weak investigator produced the case, defense could attack the investigator. If Amara Vale produced it, insurers, prosecutors, foreign regulators, and courts would trust the work. They would do so before they ever saw Ren. Her reputation was not incidental. It was part of the mechanism. I wasn't sent in to find proof, she said. Ren said nothing. I was sent in to certify whatever proof they gave me. She looked at the impossible authorization tied to his key. Perfect signature. Impossible time. Sarah did not need Amara to fabricate evidence. He needed her to validate evidence that had already been prepared. The earlier moments rearranged themselves. The summaries instead of originals, the premature timestamps, the refusal to investigate police systems, the cloned access module that could compromise Ren's network and then create exactly the kind of access trail prosecutors would call independent discovery. Amara finally understood the scale of it. They weren't using the police to fight your world, she said. They were using investigations to decide which parts of it survived. Ren looked at the case files. And Shun benefits when the right people disappear. That I knew. No, you knew he had protection. She turned another screen toward him. This is more than protection. He and Sarah are restructuring the market together. The raid order reached Amara's secure device at 7:18. Execution moved forward by 12 hours. Sarah had stopped waiting. At nearly the same moment, Ren received confirmation that Shun had formally triggered the succession vote. 2 systems closing at once. Amara understood why. If Ren resisted police, Sarah got violence obstruction and public validation. If Ren surrendered quietly, Shun gained time to secure internal control and bury records. If Amara challenged the raid openly, Sarah could present her as compromised by proximity to the target. Their old strategy: observe, verify. Wait was finished. Amara stood. I need the insurer archive. Ren understood immediately. The independent timestamps. Yes. The same system Shun had tried to use to attach her signature to backdated approvals had preserved external copies. Those copies existed outside both Kisaragi and police control. Amara began requesting sealed records from London, Rotterdam, and Singapore. She used emergency forensic channels tied to her corporate cover. She did not send anything through Sarah. Within 90 minutes, the first archive responded. Then another. The pattern was devastating. Several police-linked records had been created before the shipment's authorizations or transactions they supposedly documented, not after, before. Amara assembled the chain carefully. No accusations, no interpretation, just time. She sent the package simultaneously to independent oversight authorities and the insurer consortium. She sent it to 2 external prosecutorial contacts who had worked with her. One chain of command could suppress a complaint, not 6 institutions receiving the same metadata at the same time. Sarah called while the transfer was still running. "Stop what you're doing." Amara watched the progress bar. "You'll need to be more specific. You are no longer authorized to circulate operational evidence. This isn't your operational evidence." Amara. It was the first time he used her name like a warning. She ended the call. Across Tokyo, Ren made his own choice. He did not order his men to block the police. He did not move to a safe location. He called the succession vote himself. By the time Shun arrived, the senior Kisaragi council was already seated. Ren placed 3 encrypted drives on the table. Shun looked at them and understood before anyone spoke. "You won't do this." Ren connected the first drive to the secure display. Internal transfers appeared. Shell companies, security accounts, political intermediaries. Funds moving from Shun-controlled operations into channels tied to investigations Sarah's office had supervised. Shun leaned forward. "You expose those records, you expose yourself." "Yes, you expose all of us." "Yes." That was the price. Ren had spent years trying to cut the organization apart without detonating it. Now there was no clean version left. He released the files, not selectively, not just Shun's transactions. Everything needed to establish context. That included crimes committed under Ren's own authority. The room changed immediately. Some men turned on Shun. Others turned on Ren. The vote became meaningless because the structure they were voting to control had just been opened to investigators. By noon, Sarah had been removed from operational command pending review. The raid did not disappear, but its legal basis fractured under independent evidence, showing contamination and pre-generated records. Shun lost the protection that had made his position viable. Ren lost the secrecy that had made his position powerful. Amara found him hours later in the same office where he had first dismissed her as an auditor. The building was quieter now. Lawyers occupied 3 floors. Investigators had secured server rooms. Half the senior staff had been sent home. Ren stood beside the window. "You won," Amara said. No, she understood. Neither had. Sarah's system had been exposed. Shun's alliance had collapsed. But Ren had also handed authorities legitimate evidence against himself. Amara had destroyed the chain of command that had protected her career. They had neutralized the machine by putting themselves inside its gears. Ren looked at her. "You should go." "Probably." Neither moved. There was no confession, no promise that consequences would somehow spare them. Only a fact neither could undo anymore. When the crisis came, Amara had trusted Ren with evidence that could destroy her career. Ren had trusted Amara with records that could destroy his empire. And both had used that trust not to protect each other from consequence, but to make sure the truth survived them. The first thing Amara lost was certainty. Not her job, not immediately. Certainty. For years she had believed that if evidence survived scrutiny, she assumed the system handling it could be trusted. Sarah had broken that belief more effectively than any courtroom failure ever could. The investigation into him expanded quickly after independent oversight received the timestamp records. His access was suspended. Then, his command authority disappeared. Internal review teams seized his communications authorization history and archived operational files. Shun's position collapsed with him. Without Sarah controlling the investigative environment, The financial trail Ren released became impossible to contain. Shun denied strategic coordination and claimed the transfers were ordinary protection payments routed through intermediaries. The explanation failed. Too many dates aligned. Too many beneficiary companies overlapped. Too many decisions had followed the same pattern. They did not drag him away in public. There was no dramatic downfall worthy of the mythology he had built around himself. He lost something more useful. Access. Banks froze. Accounts connected to the investigation. Board members stopped returning calls. Political intermediaries distanced themselves. Men who had once treated his approval as necessary began negotiating directly with prosecutors and regulators. Power had depended on that assumption. Shun could always make another system move for him. Now the systems were examining him instead. Ren faced a different consequence. His cooperation protected him from the fabricated conspiracy case Sarah had prepared. It did not erase anything real. Authorities now possessed internal records documenting illegal coercion and undeclared payments. They showed concealed ownership structures and decisions made under Ren's leadership. He could not expose the architecture selectively and then ask everyone to ignore his part in maintaining it. Several Kisaragi companies entered monitored restructuring. Others were separated entirely. Assets connected directly to criminal activity were seized. By the end of the first month, Kisaragi Maritime Holdings still existed on paper, but not as the organization Ren had inherited. The old center was gone. That mattered more than the name. Amara saw Ren once, during that period, across a government conference room. Lawyers sat between them. He wore no signet ring. She noticed before she wanted to. They were not allowed to speak privately. The last time they had stood alone, they had destroyed the structures protecting both of them. Now, procedure had returned to fill the space. Amara's own review took nearly 3 months. She was cleared of evidence fabrication. Her reconstruction of the metadata became central to the Sarah inquiry. None of that made her decisions disappear. She had withheld information from her chain of command. She had shared sensitive material with an investigative target. She had maintained contact with Ren after recognizing that her judgment was becoming personally involved. Every action could be explained. Some could even be defended. That did not make them compliant. Her director offered her a position in London. Senior. Prestigious. No undercover work. No independent field authority. She read the offer once and understood it completely. The institution was not punishing her. It was containing uncertainty. She declined. Her resignation surprised people who assumed vindication would make her want to remain. It did the opposite. 6 weeks later, she accepted a role with an independent transnational financial integrity commission. Smaller budget, less rank, fewer protections. But when evidence crossed jurisdictions, she would control how the originals were preserved. No summaries without source access. No metadata hidden behind hierarchy. Sarah had not taken her faith in evidence. He had taken her faith that institutions deserved automatic ownership of it. Ren's choice came later. The remaining Kisaragi loyalists approached him quietly. No formal meeting. No old council chamber. They offered something simpler. They could rebuild. Not everything. Enough. Nightlife holdings, security contracts, 2 port intermediaries, a smaller network, more disciplined, easier to protect. Ren listened, then said no. One of the men reminded him that without centralized control, former Kisaragi operators were already moving toward other groups. Ren knew. That had always been his fear, but rebuilding the old structure would require the same bargains he had spent 5 years trying to eliminate. Secrecy. Debt, leverage, protection that became ownership. He had already paid to break that system. He would not pay again to restore it. Months passed before Amara saw him without lawyers, investigators, or institutional rules between them. He chose a restaurant near Tokyo Bay that neither of them had any connection to. That seemed deliberate. No private club, no Kisaragi property, no protected room. Just a quiet table near the back. Ren arrived first. Amara sat across from him. For a few minutes they talked about ordinary things. Work, travel, a terrible redevelopment project near the station. Neither mentioned what they had survived. Then Amara said, "There's something you should know." Ren waited. "If the evidence had been real, I would have arrested you." "I know." She studied him. "No. I mean, even after everything. Even after I trusted you." "I know." That answer mattered. He did not ask her to regret it. He did not turn her integrity into betrayal. He accepted that loving someone, trusting someone, and excusing them were not the same thing. Ren reached into his coat and placed a key on the table. Amara looked at it. Subtle. "I considered flowers. That would have been more suspicious. It's my apartment." She touched the key, but did not take it. Ren did not push it closer. That mattered too. Months earlier, he had tried to protect her by controlling access to her. Now he waited. Amara reached into her bag and placed another key beside his. Ren looked down. "Yours, yes." He understood. Not relocation, not possession, not one person entering the other's life under someone else's terms. 2 doors, 2 choices, no safe houses. Amara said, "No territories, no deciding what risks I'm allowed to take." That condition sounds familiar. It should. Ren picked up her key. Amara took his. Nothing else needed to be said. A year later, the old Kisaragi headquarters belonged to a technology company. The logo was gone. The executive floors had been rebuilt. Ren still passed the building occasionally and never stopped. He now advised legitimate companies on restructuring complicated ownership networks. The work used knowledge he had acquired from a life he could not cleanly separate from himself. Some former Kisaragi men still bowed when they saw him. Others looked away. Amara traveled often. Her cases had not become easier, only harder to lie about. One evening she returned home late and found Ren at the kitchen table repairing an old mechanical watch beneath a small lamp. Beside his hand lay the Kisaragi signet ring. She had not seen it in months. The ring had once authenticated private orders through an embedded encryption chip. Now the chip sat beside it removed. Amara set down her bag. "What are you going to do with that?" Ren turned the ring once between his fingers. Nothing. She believed him. Not because he had become harmless. He had not. Not because she had forgotten what he had been capable of. She had not. Trust had become something that demanded more than either of those things did. Power mattered less than what a person chose to keep in reserve. Subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Tell me what you think actually changed them.